Hello everyone. During this lesson we will learn how to work with data lists in the Python language, as well as explore the methods needed to manipulate them. Data lists are very similar to regular variables. The main difference is that while a variable can store only one value, a list can store a collection of multiple values, or in other words, a set of multiple elements. We have access to each of these elements individually. We can display each element on the screen, interact with it, and perform all the manipulations we did with variables. To create a list, we first need to give it a name and then assign it various values. Let's do that now. The name can be anything you like, but the key point is not to use special characters like this. And the name should be as meaningful as possible. For example, I want to create a list where I'll store various numbers. For this reason, I'll name such a list nums, meaning some numbers. Now, I need to assign values. Earlier, when we talked about variables, I simply assigned a specific value. Now, as we're working with a list, I need to open square brackets. These square brackets indicate that this is already a list, which can consist of many different values. There can be 1 value, 2 values, 100 values, or even 1,000 values. It's up to you. If I leave the entry in this format, we now have created an empty list with no elements. Let's immediately try to display this list on the screen. To do this, we use the standard print function and pass the name of our list inside it. If I run the program, we'll notice that we simply output square brackets. This tells us that we attempted to display an empty list. It doesn't have any elements, but at the same time, the list was displayed on the screen. Now let's try to add elements. Elements are added directly within the square brackets, and to add them, we simply append values separated by commas. The number of elements here is unlimited. If I run this, now we'll see in the output that all elements have been added to the list. An important point here is that when creating a list, you must use square brackets, not any others. Because if we use other brackets, we will create a different data type. We'll talk about these data types as we go through the video course, but for now, you should just know that square brackets are used to create a list. Another important point is that usually, in other programming languages, we can only use one data type in lists. For example, I've only specified integers in our list, but in Python, you can use different data types right away. For example, here I can set a value of the bool data type, as well as some string, and so on. All of this will work perfectly fine. Now let's learn how to work with a specific element of the list. Suppose I want to change the number 3 in my list to the number 30. To do this, I simply refer to our list, and here I need to specify square brackets and indicate the index, or in other words, the ordinal number of the list element I want to access. If we talk about indices, they always start from the number 0. Therefore, to access the first element by its number, I need to refer to it by the index, as the 0th element. So, if I need to change the first element, I specify the number 0. Then I can set a new value, for example, 30. If I run this, we'll notice that the first element was previously 3, and then we changed it to 30. Similarly, if I want to replace the value true with the number 1, I again refer to nums, and here I need to again take the element by index. Let's count together. This is our 0th element by index, the first, the second, the third, the fourth, and accordingly the 5th element by index. So, here I put the number 5. And as a value, I'll set it to 1. Now if we run this, we'll see that previously it was true, and now it became 1. The same applies when outputting all elements of the list. However, if I want to display not the entire list at once but a specific element, let's say I want to display the element where the value is 2. Then I need to specify the index of the element I want to display in square brackets. So, again, this is our 0th element, this is the first, and this is our second element by index, so here I specify 2. We press run and see that 2 is displayed on the screen. By the way, lists are so flexible that as an element, you can create another list. To do this, I specify square brackets again, and this list can contain other elements. Also, in lists, there's a cool trick. If we need to display the last element in the list, we just need to specify the value 1 in square brackets. And if we run this, we'll see that our last element is displayed on the screen. This is very convenient because in the future, you may not know how many elements you have in the list. And it's not always convenient to count from the very beginning which element has the very last position. Therefore, as you can see, it's much easier and clearer to write it this way. When working with lists, we always have access to a variety of built-in functions that exist in the Python language. Let's consider some of these functions. Let's create a new list and name it numbers. Here we'll add several new numbers. Now, suppose that I want to add a new value to this list. However, I want to add this value a little later, after creating the list itself. How can we do this? It's quite logical to think that we should first refer to the list itself. And then, we need to use a method called append. It allows us to add an element to the very end of the list. Inside the brackets, we specify the desired value. Let it be 100. Let's then print the list below to see what's inside it. And if we run all of this, we'll see that everything has been processed correctly. That is, we first created a list with only 3 elements, and then, using the append method, added one more element. And this element is added to the very end. If you need to set a value at a specific index, then in this case, you need to use another method called insert. This method takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is the index of the element where we'll place it, and the second parameter is simply the value. For example, let's say I want to set a new value instead of the number 2. Therefore, here I specify the number 1 as the first parameter, and as the second parameter, let's specify the value I want to place. Let it be true. If we run this, we'll see that instead of the number 2, we now have the value true. It's worth noting that the number 2 itself is not deleted but shifted one element to the right. Now let's talk about how to place not one but a set of multiple elements into the list. For this, we need to use a method called extend. This method takes another list as a parameter, and this list can consist of multiple elements. Here, for example, I'll write 3 elements. And if I run this, I'll see that 3 new values have been added to the end of our list. You can also sort your list however you like. To do this, we refer to the list again and use the sort method. It doesn't take any parameters, and if we run the program, we'll see that all elements are sorted. Also, you may wonder why the value true ended up at the beginning. The thing is that the value true is analogous to the value 1, and false is analogous to 0. Therefore, when we sort the list, true is not treated as a string but as the value 1. In addition to sort, we also have a method called reverse. This method reverses the entire list. Additionally, we can remove all elements from the list. To delete an element, we can use a function called pop. If nothing is passed into it, then the last element will always be deleted. Also, if we need to delete an element by a specific value, we can use a method called remove, and we simply pass the value inside. For example, let's remove the value true. If I run this, we'll see that this element is no longer there. Speaking of interesting methods, we can consider a method called count. This method allows us to count the number of elements that match the value we pass to the method. Let's assume that we pass the number 5 inside, and if we run the program, we'll see that the number 2 is displayed, because the value 5 occurs twice in our list. And if you need to delete everything, then, in that case, we can use the clear method. It doesn't take any parameters, and if we run it, we'll notice that the list is completely cleared. Now let's delve into the practical aspect of working with lists. To begin with, I suggest simply creating a list consisting of several numbers, a string, and a Boolean value. Now, I would like to display all the elements from this list on the screen. Of course, we can do this using the standard print method and refer to each element by index to print a specific element of the list. However, this approach is very time-consuming. If our list contains 100 elements, writing many such lines of code would be somewhat cumbersome and, most importantly, time-consuming. Therefore, we won't use this method. For quick iteration through the list, loops come in handy. We have already studied them, and now we will use them for quick iteration through the list and work with its specific elements. For this purpose, we use the for loop. Of course, you can iterate through the list using a while loop as well, but for is much more convenient, especially when dealing with lists. Here, let's create a variable named L, which stands for elements. I simply indicate that I am iterating through the list called nums. And to display each element of the list, I simply use the print function along with the variable element. If we run this, we'll notice that all elements from this list have been correctly displayed. Well, that brings us to the end of our lesson. In this lesson, we learned how to work with data lists and also learned some useful methods necessary for working in Python. Thank you all for watching. Until we meet again, goodbye.